Hello friends, welcome to another Word of Gord. We're continuing on today with our Average Folks in the Afterlife series number 29. Wondering if the light is bright enough. Bit of a cloudy day here today. Makes the light from the window a little less than usual. The window's over there. Continuing on with the second part of Bruce Moen's extended interaction with the group mind of the alien species that he finds observing the Earth changes at focus 35, as the Monroe people would have it. Their way of divvying up the various levels of the spirit planes. And we got started on that last time, and as I said, it's quite a long interaction, so we'll continue on today, and I think we'll get done with it, but that's terrible phrasing, get done with it, as I'm trying to get rid of it. No, it's very important, I think. It's one of the few interactions you will see in any metaphysical book of recent vintage where humans are actually teaching something to the aliens rather than the other way around. Many of the alien species are very convinced of their own superiority to us and come here full of themselves and what they can do for us as warring human beings, destroying ourselves daily, as I'm sure that's how they see it. The truth of that's another argument and another Word of God video. So let me continue. Bruce Moen from Voyage into the Afterlife, number 3, Charting Unknown Territory. It took a good 10 seconds or more for the squabbling sound of the 1,000 turkeys in the big tin can to quiet down. I knew immediately I'd just witnessed an example of what happens when there is a strong individual expression within the group mind of a telepathically connected race. Utter chaos erupted in their thinking process as they reacted to the logical impossibility of my statement. After a short struggle, they got themselves back in the groove of their normal form of consciousness, and then the spokesman connected with me again. I continued, in my opinion, as an Earth School student, in order for you to fulfill your mission, you won't be able to rely on your hardware. The sound of 1,000 turkey voices screaming in a big tin can erupted again. Squabble, squabble, squabble. Flew around like a zillion ping pong balls, bouncing and ricocheting off everything and everyone inside their ship, until the crew regained control of their individual thoughts. It quieted down more quickly this time. As you've probably noticed, there is some disbelief on the part of most of our crew on that point, the spokesman said. Could you explain more, please, about our hardware inadequacy? Not so much inadequacy as unsuitability, I replied. The only way I know to observe and record the feeling or emotional impact of an energy such as love is for me to be the instrumentation, me personally. I think to complete your mission, you'll have to become the detectors and recorders yourselves. It will require that you use your body as the hardware. Your other instruments might pick up something, but it will most likely not fulfill your mission to understand the meaning of feelings. Small interjection here. I think this argument of Bruce's could also be applied to many of our scientists on Earth who rely on their instrumentation to record and qualify their observations rather than using their own consciousness. And that, while that might be fine for some investigations, for anything relating to the mystic or the metaphysical, it's hopeless, as some of you probably know very well. Anyway, on we go. Such an idea had obviously never occurred to these guys. I heard a minor bit of squabbling off and on during the extended silence as second Gath group pondered the meaning of what I was saying. Since the energy of pure unconditional love is involved in the great event we are here to record, is there any way you can demonstrate to us what you mean by using that specific energy? Spokesman asked. Now it became clear to me why Robin, one of the women in our group, had suddenly appeared nearby just a few moments ago. I'd caught her arrival and wondered why she had showed up. Just a moment, please, I toned back to the spokesman. Then I turned my attention to Robin. Sherip, Nank, Greech, I toned to her. Thereby she took into herself, understood and remembered the entire story from my first point of contact with second Gath group to just after she'd arrived. I ended my toning to Robin with the question mark, "Can you help me with a demonstration for these guys?" Robin took it all in and immediately toned back. "Sure, let's give it a try. This could be a lot of fun." Then, turning our attention to the spokesman, Robin and I indicated our willingness and readiness to demonstrate. "Just a moment," he said. "We want to do an instrument check to make sure everything is ready to record." Then, after a few moments, "Okay, go ahead and begin your demonstration." Robin and I stood face to face a few feet apart. We gazed deeply into each other's eyes, smiling, and allowing a feeling of pure unconditional love to build up in both of us. We each let our individual expression of pure unconditional love energy generate our own unique tone within us separately. My tone sounded so real to me I was sure a physical world tape recorder could have picked it up and played it back. We let the power of our tones build up and each projected ours to the heart of the other. When we did, our hearts were joined together in an expression of pure unconditional love. Our tones were slightly different frequencies, and at their joining I could both hear and feel a beat frequency. I probably shouldn't have been surprised, but I was. Joining our tones, two separate individual expressions of pure unconditional love behaved just like the hemisync sound. The resulting beat frequency carried a feeling like a combination of deep gratitude and totally loving acceptance of everything and everyone. Absolute bliss. Robin and I let the beat frequency's power build up between us for about 10 seconds, and then diverted a portion of it to the general direction of second Gath group and its spokesman. We held it there for 5 or 6 seconds and then both switched it off simultaneously. After stopping, I looked around inside the ship to get an image of what the technicians were doing. They were all busily checking the readouts at their workstations. "Jabber, pop, pop, snap," came back the spokesman. "Our instruments register something, but it makes no sense to us. Some sort of time anomaly, we think." Robin and I waited for the minor squabbling sound in the background to quiet down. "Well, it's great that your instruments registered something, but like I said before, to complete your mission of observing and recording the feeling of emotional impact of this love energy, you must become the data gathering devices." They were very confused again by this statement. Squabble, squabble, squabble broke out in minor pockets of the crew, bouncing around from one area to another. It made me think of what would happen if scientists here in the Earth School were trying to learn about love by using oscilloscopes, sensors, and other physical world hardware. They might be able to sense the smoke, but they'd never feel the fire. Just then, Dar's voice came on the tape informing us it was time to return to the crystal at TMI there. Don't forget, this is a tape exercise for 15 to 20 people, and there is, I'm not sure they'd call it a controller, but someone who reminds them through their headphone to, make the next step, ask the next question. I toned to the spokesman, "Sorry, we have to return to our base now. I hope that demonstration helped." While waiting for a reply, Robin and I turned to leave, heading for TMI there. That is the Monroe Institute on the astral planes of Focus 27. Looking back as we left, I saw a rather puzzled look on second Gath group spokesman's face. I can only assume our sudden departure was another form of logical incongruity to him. I had a distinct impression he couldn't logically fathom why we'd leave right in the middle of an important experiment. Well, needless to say, there's another tape experiment for this group and more contact. And I will find the beginning of that. Here's the next tape exercise. After I started moving in that direction, my plan was to look for any stragglers from our group. I was just about to place my intent on assisting them when I felt a very odd, very strong pull, as though some kind of strange gravity was pulling on the very top of my head. I had no idea what this strange force was or why it was pulling, so I did what seemed reasonable. I let the force pull me to wherever it wanted me to go. After a brief sensation of movement through blackness, I found myself standing in front of Second Gath Group spokesman again, inside his ship. Sorry for the intrusion, but you left before we really gathered anything from the demonstration. This is very important to our mission here, and we want to continue. Could you demonstrate the impact of pure unconditional love energy for us again? We didn't really get anything we can use from your last demonstration, but we're pretty certain whatever it is you did has something to do with why we're here to observe and record. Then, looking around their spacecraft, I noticed that two of Second Gath Group's crew standing face to face on a raised platform in the control room. They were positioned between the spokesman and me and standing stiffly on the platform. Yes, the spokesman said. These two from our ship have volunteered to participate in the experiment. Since you said we would have to be the sensing and recording devices, two of our crew members have volunteered to allow you to demonstrate using their bodies. We've selected a male and female for the experiment, since in your previous demonstration a male and female of your race were present. The image of these two volunteers still stands out in my mind. They stood at attention military style. They were both dressed in uniforms that made it difficult to determine if males and females of their race had any visible distinguishing features. Also, they were either wearing some sort of helmet or these guys had very large heads. Their heads seemed disproportionately large for the rest of their body size. Both had volunteered for a mission all of Second Gath Group considered potentially dangerous. Like a couple of gung-ho Marines, they'd volunteered, understanding the full well it might cost them their lives. These were dedicated professional exploders who understood the concept of risk versus gain. Knowing they might be killed didn't deter their logical understanding that someone must volunteer to fulfill the overall mission of the group. The potential gain for their race was a necessary risk. As I was looking over two volunteers, Robin came into view again. I acknowledged her presence and let out a squeak beep to her, bringing her up to the present. With this communication, she got everything that had transpired. Sure, I'm game. Let's demonstrate it again for them, was her response. These two volunteers are so serious. Think we should tell them it isn't going to hurt? She laughed. No, I'll let them find out on their own, she said, punctuating her statement with a devilish giggle. Standing back about 10 or 15 feet from the two volunteers, both Robin and I looked over carefully. I don't know, Robin. Which one is the male and which the female? I toned to her, trying to keep a straight face. Her giggling response was, that's a good question, Bruce. In those suits, it's really hard to pick out any recognizable features. If they're males and females have any, that is. Yeah, I'd really like to kind of get this right, I giggled back at her. I think the male is the one on the left. Yeah, she responded. I was thinking the one on the right was female. Let's just go with that. We each flew over to a position very close to and behind the volunteers. Robin stood behind the female, I behind the male. The volunteers were somewhat transparent to my vision, and looking through them I could see Robin's smiling face, superimposed over the less visible body of the female volunteer. I nodded to the spokesman, indicating Robin and I were ready to begin the demonstration. Just a moment, he said. Let us check to make sure all our instrumentation is ready to record. I glanced at the technician in the control room. All eyes were glued to their monitors and readouts. Okay, you may begin when you're ready. I turned to look directly into Robin's eyes. She was smiling confidently, happily. So was I. A feeling of pure unconditional love began to fill each of us. We both let the feeling build up for a moment or two, and then we stepped into the bodies of the volunteers from behind. We stood there gazing into each other's hearts, allowing the emotional expression of love to build for perhaps 3 or 4 seconds. I took a quick look at the technicians in our control room. They all looked completely stunned, frozen in place. Even the spokesman was affected. Not a single one had the intense focus on their monitors and readouts I'd seen just seconds before. Instead, blissful, ecstatic smiles were just beginning to form on some of the faces. I suddenly realized that since these guys were a telepathic race, they were all experiencing what the volunteers were experiencing. I looked back at Robin, and she and I both stepped back in unison out of the bodies of the volunteers. The control room became a flurry of frantic activity as the technicians snapped out of their stunned stupor to check the readouts and the instrumentation. Not a single one had maintained consciousness during the demonstration. In Monroe Institute parlance, they had all clicked out. This is very unusual, the spokesman said. I assure you this has never happened before. We seem to have experienced some sort of total malfunction of every piece of our equipment. System clocks show approximately 3 of your Earth seconds elapsed during the experiment, but not a single other instrument registers anything. I apologize for any inconvenience, but would you mind demonstrating again? I glanced over to get Robin's okay and was surprised to see her gone. Instead, Rebecca was standing in her place behind the female volunteer. Rebecca smiled and nodded her agreement. Believe me when I say it will be my great pleasure to repeat the demonstration for you again, I toned to him. Very well, we'll need a few moments to recheck our instruments and reset all our recorders. That would be fine with us. Please take all the time you need to be certain your instrumentation is ready. Turning back toward the female volunteer, Rebecca and I stood, beaming radiant smiles to each other, waiting for the go from the spokesman. I had to suppress the urge to giggle as I said out loud, "We're ready when you are." After a moment, the spokesman nodded, indicating they were ready. Looking directly into each other's hearts, Rebecca and I simultaneously stepped into the bodies of the volunteers. We let the feeling of pure unconditional love that was building between us continue to rise in power for perhaps 6 or 7 seconds this time. I took a quick survey of the control room to check on the technicians. Their silly, goofy-looking, love-struck smiles had started again. We continued till most of them had their heads leaning over backwards in their chairs, in a completely relaxed position, an expression of open-jawed bliss on all their faces. They were completely and totally clicked out, totally unconscious. Then Rebecca and I stepped back in unison out of the bodies of the volunteers. The technicians had more time to relax their bodies into pure unconditional love, feeling during this demonstration. They had slumped into their chairs and were in deep relaxation, and some got quite a jolt when we stepped abruptly back out of the volunteers' bodies. Their physical bodies jerked violently into positions they had been in just before we started. It registered with several of them that their body position had changed during the demonstration. We may even have caused a case or two of whiplash if these people have necks like ours. Most had just suddenly catapulted themselves back into the body positions they'd been in just before we started, without realizing anything out of the ordinary had happened. The control room became a flurry of activity, and when it settled down, the spokesman addressed me. "I apologize," he said. "This is highly unusual. We seem to have had another malfunction on our equipment. This time our system clocks show approximately 7 of your seconds elapse. And this is odd too. None of our crew has any memory of what occurred during those 7 seconds. We're experiencing a loss of time during your demonstration. I know it might be an inconvenience, but would you mind demonstrating again?" "Not at all," I replied. "It will be our great pleasure." This time Francine's smiling face greeted me as I turned back, expecting to see Rebecca. Francine had taken Rebecca's place, and we were both doing our very best to suppress a severe case of the giggles. "Whenever you're ready," I called out. The spokesman nodded after their instrumental check, signalling they were ready to record a next demonstration of the emotional impact of all that love energy. This time Francine and I allowed the feeling to build up for perhaps 20 seconds or so. I was floating in a warm, cozy sea of pure unconditional love, a bliss I could have stayed in forever. Smiling from ear to ear, I turned to look out over the control room technicians. We'd held the state long enough that a few of them were beginning to regain some level of consciousness just before we stepped out of the volunteers' bodies. A few of them were beginning to catch the faintest whiff of the feeling. The rest, almost all of them, hadn't regained the consciousness and again lurched violently toward their pre-demonstration positions. None was quite sure what was going on, but there was a few who were almost conscious of the feeling. Some more squabbling erupted in chaos in the control room. "This is completely unexplainable," the spokesman blasted after our screaming turkey sounds subsided. "We're experiencing the same malfunction of our equipment again. A little over 20 seconds this time. But this time, some crew members claim something happened during the missing time. Nobody is able to describe what happened in terms that the rest of us can understand. We're postulating you're demonstrating some sort of control of time. It appears your Earth School people are capable of making time disappear by rendering us all unconscious. Our first system clocks are correct. You're somehow able to remove our awareness of the passing of time, and we are unable to resist. Some crew members view this as a potentially dangerous threat to our security. All the squabbling you heard was required to restore order to get the entire crew's agreement and consent to continue. All have agreed to do so because of the importance of our mission, but we must also consider our security. Are we getting close to a logical point at which to terminate further experimentation?" the spokesman said. "Your perception of missing time is most likely the same thing we call clicking out," I replied. "Some in the Earth School understand that when we experience something completely beyond our ability to comprehend, unconsciousness is often the result. Clicking out is a common experience for Earth people too. It means unconscious to the experience. We'll try it again, and I think this time you'll get it. Let us know when you're ready." I looked over at Robin and saw she had returned, much to my surprise, taking Francine's place. She was beaming an absolutely radiant, loving smile from every molecule of her being. Bright pinks and yellows filled the space surrounding her. I realized as I was looking at Robin that her place had been taken by Rebecca and Francine to communicate the impersonal nature of pure unconditional love energy. It had been done to demonstrate that this was not restricted to only one pairing of humans. It demonstrated that pure unconditional love can be shared by any individual. We waited for the signal, then stepped back into the bodies of the volunteers. This time I checked the control room guys right before we stepped in and followed their progress throughout the demonstration. Many were no longer bothering to pay attention to their workstation consoles, monitors, or readouts. They were leaning back in their chairs, relaxed and waiting for the demonstration to begin. As we stepped in, the love-struck expressions returned to their faces, telling me they were there again, stunned by the power of the experience. Robin and I let the feeling build higher and higher until it was reminiscent of my experience during the first tape of the program. It continued building, and it felt like it had when Nancy Monroe enveloped Bob, Ed, Rebecca, and me in a cloud. It felt like I was going to burst into flames again. Robin and I held that level for over a minute and a half. We held it so long our bodies disappeared and were replaced by a single soft ball of gently swirling pastels. Warm, gentle currents of soft, loving beauty wafted through the single orb in which Robin and I had become one being, loving itself. Good line, one being loving itself. We glowed with the fire and power of the sun. Ooh, just like Pink Floyd, set the controls for the heart of the sun. Somewhere after the first minute or so of holding that feeling, some of the technicians in the control room regained enough consciousness to begin moving their bodies. We continued to hold the feeling of ecstatic bliss. A few technicians were able to stand and move around the ship. A few of them consciously took in the full force, ecstatic blast of the glowing ball. Robin and I had become as the expression of pure unconditional love energy between two human beings. The blissed out joy in those few technicians' faces as they looked at one another in the control room clearly indicated they were acutely aware of the feeling. We held the feeling long enough to ensure that those who were conscious would retain memory of the experience. Once we were certain of that, Robin and I gradually let the feeling subside, separating back into our individual selves. Then slowly we turned down the feeling until it flickered like the flame of a candle. As we held the feeling low and flickering, a few more technicians began to move around the control room. The gradual reduction minimized the shock to the crew when at last we stepped out of the volunteers' bodies. As we stepped out, the energy level dropped for the second Gath group, and I felt an immediate collective yearning coming from the few conscious members of the crew. They had experienced the feeling of pure unconditional love at a powerful emotional level and wistfully yearned to experience it again. A wispy feeling of missing that energy floated from the few crew members who'd felt it. As the rest of the technicians regained consciousness, I could sense the feeling of pure unconditional love moving from those who had become conscious during the demonstration to those who had not. Before the demonstration, I hadn't even considered this possibility. The memory of the experience, firmly implanted in the minds of just a few of the crew members, quickly spread throughout the ship. Thoughts were no longer the only things communicated telepathically between them. Now the feeling of pure unconditional love passed between them too. Immediately following, the feeling spread through the remainder of the crew. The collective yearning to feel it again, coming from the entire crew this time, washed over me like a gentle 20-foot roller out at sea. There is such a bittersweet longing in that feeling. Without realizing it would happen, without any thoughts of the consequences, all of Second Gath Group had just experienced the emotional impact of both pure unconditional love energy and its true polar opposite, its absence. The sense of yearning dropped a little over time as we stood in silence but remained in the background energy of the entire crew. I looked over at the spokesman. I think you got it this time. Judging by the looks of your crew and the feeling of yearning I sense coming from them, I say you guys definitely got it this time. Yes, something very, very unusual has happened, but we're not sure of what to make of it yet, he slowly replied. But we can all recall from our collective memory something beyond our ability to express it in words. Is that what you call a feeling? Yes, that was a feeling. And although we on Earth label our feelings with words, feelings are something far beyond the ability of words to express. They are an experience of an emotional energy within ourselves, as pure unconditional love energy is now for you, I replied. We all fell silent again for a little while, letting the impact of the experience soak in. During the silence, two other members of our Exploration 27 group flew in and hovered nearby. I'll call them Julie and Rollo. As program participants, these two had been falling in love with each other over the past few days, and I wasn't at all surprised that they were hand in hand exploring together. Then, suddenly shifting gears, I addressed the spokesman. Say, listen, my friend and I have some other things we must do now. We need to be moving along. Is there any way we can have another demonstration of that feeling? The spokesman toned. The two volunteers were still standing on the platform, ready to continue. I looked over at Rollo and Julie and toned shaleep, bip, bop, whoosh, whoosh. In those few sounds, they were given the complete story of what had happened since the beginning of my first encounter. It ended with a question mark because I was asking if they would mind taking our places. They turned to look, starry-eyed, into each other's faces, acknowledging to each other they were willing to participate. Both turned back to look at me, and their happy, smiling response was, "Sure, it will be our pleasure." Remember, guys, this is an exercise to demonstrate the emotional impact of pure and unconditional love energy. I remarked, it might be a good idea to go easy on the sexual aspects of this for now, but I'll leave that up to you two. Turning toward Robin, smiling warmly, I expressed my gratitude and thanks, acknowledging her for the powerful, wonderful, loving being that she is. We both allowed the feeling of love to well up inside us as we hovered there, tears of joy in our eyes, looking into each other's hearts. Then I turned back, looking toward the second Gath group spokesman. As Robin and I hovered there watching, I could clearly see him smiling in anticipation as Julie and Rollo swooped toward their positions behind the two volunteers. That was my last contact with second Gath group. As I accelerated away, that last image faded into blackness. Well, excellent. Thank you, Bruce, for that. Thank you for not only experiencing it, but deciding to write about it. A couple of comments. I'd like to point out their comment to Bruce about that energy paralyzing them and pushing them to unconsciousness, sort of freeze framing them. It reminded me very much of the many accounts of abductees, alien abductees, who, as they're being abducted, notice that if they're in a group situation, either their partner in bed beside them or other people in a room, the others are kind of freeze framed into unconsciousness as the abduction takes place. And it's obviously a trick of the aliens' energy abilities to do so. And this has been mentioned and commented on many times over the last, at least 20 years, if not longer. And I think there's an interesting point to be observed here. Our heart chakra and our ability to use it is, in some ways, our secret weapon. And I've mentioned this on many occasions in different situations. We don't realize that, particularly when the aliens, not these aliens, other aliens, there's many groups visiting, as perhaps you know, some say at least 15 or 20. They've all got different agendas and different abilities and different attitudes. When they point out our warring ability to war over anything, at least according to their standards, what I don't think they ever realize is that our ability to be warlike, to defend our loved ones, and that's, some of wars are based on pushing a political or religious agenda, but a lot of wars are defending our loved ones, or at least the political elites use that notion to get us to go to war. In World War I, they used to say to British pacifists, what would you do if a German raped your sister? That sort of a thing. And I would say in World War II, the country I'm from, Britain, we strongly felt we were going to defend our loved ones from the oppression of the Nazi philosophy, which was obvious as they took over other countries in Europe. So I'm saying that our determination to defend our loved ones, which goes back to early tribal days of, fighting with swords and shields and axes and whatnot, is an expression, perhaps not recognized, of our heart chakra energy. If we didn't love others, we wouldn't go to war. We wouldn't give a shit. Now, I realize a lot of people are doing this for power and gain and, real estate and all that kind of stuff. But the average warrior, soldier, is using what I would say is an unrecognized part of their heart chakra energy. So just something to ponder on if you read, as I do, the stories of abductees and what they go through, whether they're being abducted by the aliens or re-abducted by the government military personnel who are chasing around the aliens, trying to find out what they're doing, and often re-abduct people to check up on them. There's many tales of this. Google the word MILABS, MILABS, if you haven't come across this before. Anyway, just a few thoughts on that. And remember, our heart chakra energies are our secret weapon. And I was mentioned this even with David Jacobs' recent book on the hybrids that are emerging amongst us and their superior psychic abilities and telepathic abilities, which he thinks they will use to control society in the next couple of generations. And it's my feeling that despite those superior abilities, we can love bomb them into not bothering to do it. We love bomb them enough, they won't give a shit about being leaders or being in control or using us. No, they won't. They'll enjoy being loved, as we all do. Anyway, with that positive little thought, next episode we'll get back to the wonderful Jürgen Zhu and his Vistas of Infinity, which we just took a little sidetrack from. And until then, which will be sooner than you think, and sooner than you emote, be well, my friends, and I shall see you soon.